This is Digital Leaders Boardroom. In 4 episodes we will talk with digital leaders how to embrace digital technology and develop a digital first strategy. Let's dive into this. Hello, this is number 3 of the sequence of the Digital Leaders Boardroom, and today we're going to talk about interacting at the digital edge. And I do that with 4 magnificent digital leaders at this table, and I will introduce them shortly as you have been used by clockwise. I got Johan and from Equinix, I got my dear friend Kevin, and he's from Signify. I got Bas, and he's from KPMG, and I got Glenn, and he's from the Brain Creators. So welcome. Let's have a good conversation about the interacting at the digital edge. And before we do that, ladies and gentlemen, we will give you a little setting the scene. And I've asked my dear friend Bas from KPMG to enlighten us with some insights and trends, so to speak, right?
Yes.
So tell us, what are the main?
Okay, I brought some thoughts for the conversation about the customer-driven organization, and some aspects that I think that we can use in discussion to deep dive a bit on what that all entails from a digital perspective. So I think the first step is that we see a big trend from the customer-driven enterprise to something that as KPMG we call the connected enterprise. And the key thing here is that it's not only about connecting with your customers, but also developing an integration between the front end, the mid office, and the back office. So things like production, supply chain, they're also interacting in a good way to your customer needs. So that's what we call the connected enterprise. And if you see the slide, you see 8 capabilities. I'm not going to name them all, but for example, the insight-led data-driven organization, seamless interaction and commerce, and integrated ecosystems are a part of those capabilities. And in total, we found these 8 capabilities that are key for the digital company that wants to make the most impact. So normally, if we support companies, we're also looking at these kind of capabilities to drive impact and drive value. And I will deep dive on a few of those for the setting the scene with you today. So one is, of course, the customer itself. I think that's what we're really talking about. And I think the key thing that we all know, but I would like to still point it out, that this customer is everywhere. And this customer is everywhere on the edge also, using all kind of new kind of devices. It's about augmented reality. It's about virtual reality. Customers are becoming active in metaverses and these kind of organizations. That's not always in your own environment. So it becomes more and more complex to be able to serve these customers. And as I just explained, they are expecting one organization, they're expecting seamless interaction. So this is a big challenge for organizations that we can dive into a bit together. There's 2 elements I would like to point out on this topic to heaten up the discussion a little bit. One is the idea of ecosystems, working in ecosystems. So as we looked at digitization and digital and data analytics, we've seen that most energy up until now, for most organizations, has been about doing that within the walls of your organization to find insights that can drive business value for your own organization. But to be able to start to support customers on the edge, it is no longer really possible, or becoming less and less, more and more difficult to do that as a single organization. So you need to collaborate with other companies, with other service providers, and work in a kind of ecosystem together to make it happen. And thinking about ecosystems, we see 2 big categories. One is what we call the traffic lights. So you can think about, like, for example, a Facebook, where you have a central organization that is facilitating a platform in which others can develop services, and they're controlling everything. And there's another one, which we call roundabouts, where actually, there's not this kind of big central organization that is doing everything, but it's more of a collaborative form in which you agree upon a few standards, like, what are the standards of the data, for example, what are the access rights, and what do we do if there's some kind of conflict. These are 3 key elements. And in this way, you can be a bit more flexible to organize an ecosystem. So there's a different way of looking at it, and maybe we can deep dive a bit more in what that would mean for you. And then a last thing that I want to bring into the discussion, also when you're thinking about these ecosystems and thinking about all kind of services on the edge, I think there is this important concept that we call the hourglass model, of the zandloper model in Dutch, for the Dutch audience here. And that's where can we in the end bring things together? Because if you look at the image, you also see there's a whole complex world, a physical world where customers are interacting, and then there's a bunch of services that you want to create on top of it. But you don't know where you all want to interact now and what kind of services you also want to agree. So the key is that you need to create some kind of space in the middle, which is your data platform or your ecosystem, where things can come together. And that's also the place where you can develop some kind of control and governance to make it work well. And maybe a last thing to put you out there, also the EU is looking, for example, when it comes to regulations, about these kind of spaces, because this is spaces where we can kind of bring in regulations or controls. So that are the key thoughts that I want to bring in for today. And maybe if we have time, we can also have something on the acceleration of the digital transformation and what that means, because of course that's a basic requirement to make this all work. So thank you.
Thanks, Bas. Looks great, and I expect that hourglass model, thin in the middle, is the dilemma today.
Yeah, it is. I think it is a dilemma what it's going to be. But maybe when you look, for example, at the internet, at one point we got the internet protocol, and that's also this kind of thing in the middle. So you can have all kind of infrastructure, but at one point it comes together to this IP, and all kind of websites and services are created, and they can go on that as well. And for data exchange and these kind of things, right. That is more. Not really set yet, so I think we expect, or I think it will be interesting to think about, could we also create such standards to make it more easy to collaborate in these kind of in this kind of way, right, as we do on the internet.
Right. So let's what we always call peel the onion a little bit, and let's start with the dynamics of today. In this case, Kevin, your dynamics within Signify, especially in the context of technology, data, for example, within manufacturing, etc. So what are your dynamics? What are your dilemmas? What is the pain or gain for you within Signify?
Well, I think you have two major ones. So first, and maybe you all know, and if you don't, just check it out, but we're all about connected lighting. So basically what you just shared, making and using light points to generate data or give the power to the user, to basically make sure that his environment is the way he or she likes it. But that's a major shift, because let's say 10 years ago we were only selling cheap light bulbs, right? So that's basically a kind of a major shift. That's on the one hand, and there are multiple use cases, for smart offices, measuring occupancy, incident management, for outdoor lighting. You name it. On the other hand, as you said, manufacturing or delivering your products and services, you want to do that in a sustainable way. And we really want to be one of the front runners in terms of sustainability. And one of the easiest things is to avoid waste and to avoid carbon footprint. So we use digital manufacturing technologies like 3D printing to make sure we only create products which are actually used, so on demand, and we print them where the user is, or the customer is in this case. But thinking about that, that opens up so many interesting opportunities, because then also you give the design power to the user. Albert Heijn, McDonald's, they design their lamp and then we print it. You think about that. Mm-hmm. And all those kind of major shifts, which is basically just putting all your supply chain upside down, is going on today, and it's all connected to connected lighting and sustainability in the end.
Right. So if you take that from that perspective, do you see the same kind of developments, or perhaps even other developments, Glenn, within your customers?
Absolutely. If you think about what was said about digital acceleration and then applying it to a company or an industry where Signify is in, it's all about creating digital automation. And what we do at Brain Creators is we generate digital inspectors. And the team that we are serving is basically closing the skill gap. Because what we see is that due to the advancement of this technology and the rapid advancement, we see that the new generation is looking for this new economy. And you see that domain expertise is becoming more scarce in manufacturing, in different kind of industries. So closing that skill gap is then important if you want to accelerate the digital acceleration. And what we do, and typically for example, what Kevin is saying around manufacturing, process 3D printing, you could imagine that you visually need to inspect it when it comes off your manufacturing line or during your manufacturing line. So how can you teach this skill and clone this skill from a human expert towards the technology? So you can automate that so that the workload for 90% can be automated, and that the domain expert can basically look at the impact. So a different kind of future of work. If you take it a step further and you look at smart lighting or connected lighting, and you look at cities, to what you were alluding to, is that you could also say people are building a digital twin in terms of lighting, street lights, of assets. For example, in a city, since World War II, they have been looking where the assets are. So they might know 40,000 streetlights, where they are plotted on a map in a digital twin. But now, are they really still there? And what is the condition of this asset? So there you already come into a pathway about connected ecosystems to see, okay, how can we use video footage, for example, to look at where the streetlights effectively are and what is the state of the asset. So then you're diving into a dynamical digital twin. And we see this cross-industry happening, these type of examples.
We will circle back on that, the dynamic digital twin. So if I pass that to you, Johan, just share with us some thoughts about the insights of Equinix.
Well, I want to follow up with where Bas was talking about the ecosystems, because I think that's very interesting. You speak about connected enterprise, and I think many people have in their head something about a partner, supplier kind of ecosystem. I want to use one or two examples to make that come to life as to what that looks like for digitally transformed enterprises. And maybe simple example, when I hit the play button on my music streaming service, do you know you're starting two services where one creates the first 13 seconds of the song and the second one creates the rest of the service. And that's because, one is close to you, close on the edges, expensive, but fast. The second one is much more cost efficient, much slower. So the first service bridges to the second service. Second example is when you hit the communicate button when you're doing a rideshare app. Did you know that you're actually no longer communicating with whoever you're using? There's another company behind it that does that service on an as-a-service basis. And when you're actually paying for that service, did you know you're actually triggering perhaps as much as 20 or 30 transactions that happen between banks and validators, whether your credit card is ready? Those are all examples of where IT services get configured on the fly, real time, on the edge. And I think they're examples of that exact ecosystem as you describe it. And it's not as much about a partner and a supplier, a customer supplier, but it's about how you can leverage a digitally developed ecosystem in a way that there are lots of capabilities available to you to compose into new capabilities like you're describing, Glenn, that weren't there before. And therefore, I really like the metaphor you laid out for us with the hourglass, because that's the connective tissue in the middle where these services come together.
Right. And if you take that into in the context that we also see that distributed is getting a new element behind it, so both from data and information, and of course on underlaying the infrastructures. What does it mean in change for the way you configure within your ecosystems then?
That's a great question, Rob, in the sense that we've been talking about data as the new oil for many years. I think we have to realize the point that now connected cars are generating 25 gigabytes of data per hour, right? 380 terabytes in a year. That's 380 hard disks of a laptop. That is a massive amount of data if you were to consume it. So at some point in time, data is not only oil, but it can also become your choke point. And therefore, somewhere in that distributed model, you'll need to drop that data or do something with the data. You can't all bring it together to a central point anymore. somewhere in your chain it needs to be data at the point of performance, is the way we tend to speak about that.
Right. The same hourglass here, Bas. Data, new gold, or the choke point, which you refer.
Yeah, I think I had today another question from an organization. Can you help me to find out how valuable my data is? We were all laughing, but it was a serious question, and I gave a serious answer.
We want names and back numbers.
But I think everybody hears the saying from 10 years ago, data is the new gold. But actually, in the end, it is really what you do with it. What can drive value, and if that is a business value or impact that you're also referring to in your introduction, Kevin, that is becoming more and more important. It's not only about making money; it's about actually having a positive contribution. And I think that is the key as you should look at the data. So yeah, what data can I actually do something with? And all other data is not really relevant and maybe worthless. And maybe to give another example, when we're looking at data management, which is by getting your data as an organization in place, then we see some companies that are starting a large-scale data management project to get the basics correct, get all that data up to par, but it's often very, very costly and very long projects. Headaches it gives. And we are much more working with the companies nowadays to not say, don't boil the ocean, but look at what actually data you currently need for your processes or for your data analytics use cases or for other services, and let's use that as a kind of, I also refer to compass as a kind of a direction of a kind of selection method to actually see what data is valuable and put that in under governance or give that quality and make sure that you have that. So that's a bit how I look at it, or how we look at it.
So just to clarify, Kevin, so why is it important to get those new technologies closer to the core? Is that from a tech push or a market pool, your business pool, so to speak?
No, either customer driven, or in our case, it's sustainability driven. If you want your users to have the power in their hands, then you have to provide them the tools. That's pretty easy. Sometimes it's also technology push. I mean, look at 3D printing. It delivers us instantly and genuinely some benefits which you can only use if you work on the edge, right? Because if I say, well, I want the design power close to the designer, and that's possible because that's what we can bring, then automatically that delivers the choice which you want to go. But in the end, if nobody would buy a customized light, or nobody would like to have a light product on demand, then there's no case. Because then there's no business. So in the end, it's always business driven. I think also your example, in the end, which you probably choose a use case. You have an idea where things go wrong or where you can optimize. So you don't start to look in the ocean. You probably have an idea where to look for, and then it's business driven in the end.
Right. So if you look to that, so what true problems does it solve, or what does it bring in benefits to your customers then, Johan?
Well, what we see is that at the application layer, it is often about insights and faster insights, more dynamic insights, leveraging the data sets. That's why I like the example from Glenn with Brain Creators, where you have an example of that, where data is first captured or experience is captured in humans and then gets transformed. That's what gets the conversation going around algorithms and the use of AI, very popular topic. But then I tend to come back to this choke point of the data, that you need to decide where that AI is going to happen. Is it going to happen at the core? Is it going to happen in the middle field? Is it going to happen at the edge? And for many new use cases and applications, we see you want it on your iPhone or in your machine or on your glass pane, that is happening somewhere. We even like to say in the wild, right? Some of it needs to operate in the wild. I think that's a great term as well. And it kind of metastasizes the thought process of it. It isn't a brain in the central part and it makes the body move, but it's a far more of a network concept where different components can operate more autonomously. And that is more my vision of where insights and algorithms and data can give us can help us to a next boundary, so to speak.
Right. So if you take that to your propositioning in terms of the brain creators, Glenn, can you share some results? Where does it benefit?
Well, so for example, I mean, when you talk about insights, if you want to surveil, for example, an airport, and you want to see from crowd management perspective or flow management perspective what is happening, on an airport you have to deal with GDPR regulations in Europe, for example, so you cannot expose the people within the image, so you need to take privacy out of the picture. So what you then see is that the video management systems, they are standalone. So you need to put it on a secure place. This is where Edge plays a role. You can put it there where it needs to happen, where you have the intelligent, and you pass things through, anonymized, where you do further analysis, and that could be on another local control room. So you make the control room more intelligent, or you share it with ecosystems. This could be an example. If you take that to a harbor and surveillance, and you look at things like suspicious behavior within a harbor, you need domain knowledge to detect that. So you can recognize it with the technology, with the AI. That can be in the camera, on the edge. You pass it through to the local edge in the data center of the harbor registration system, and then you push it through to the ecosystem again. But technically, you can also do it in a public or private cloud as well. So, and where I see the benefit, and maybe another very good example is what we are doing now with our digital road inspector. We call it Inspec. Car drives over the road, inspects the road. So what can happen now is that if you have Edge on the car and connected cars, you can send through the images where the anomalies are. So where are the defects in the road? You can send them through. If you think about ecosystems and you think about road safety data, you could also agree within an ecosystem that you say, let's combine it with sensor data from Audi, Volkswagen, Mercedes-Benz. If the brake or there's a slippage because of ice, well, if ice is there and the road is raveling, water comes in, it expands. The next thing after the wind, you have a pothole. So these are things that can correlate with each other to get better insights that you maybe before the winter starts and you know it's already raveled, the road, why don't you replace the seal coat? Because then you can expand the life cycle of your asset, you can defer cost, but from a CO2 or sustainability perspective, you don't have to rehabilitate the full road. Now take it one step further to the integrated ecosystem. You could also apply that same thing to other aspects like streetlights for Signify, or you can do it for benches, or you can do it for civil works. So you can combine multiple assets, and then you can start inspecting risk-driven based on the regulation and what is going to happen and plan ahead.
Clear example. So, and if you bring that to the preferable structured and centralized managed way, Johan, how to cope with it then?
Well, in the past, it used to be a centralized way where when startups like Brain Creators did this, they built up a tech stack in the country where they had domicile and started it and they grew it. And if they wanted to grow, they attracted new capital. They would go to another continent or another city. They built up the infrastructure. And with the infrastructure of today, you can turn on virtual networks. You can use virtual capability where you can switch on a network or a compute stack or a storage capability on the fly. And that, I think, allows you then to scale without having to make the appropriate capital investments. And you can kind of test try a market. You know, you can say, let's go try Italy, let's go try Argentina, without having to do all that as upfront capital investments where you need to contract with technology providers in each of those continents. But the concept of as a service infrastructure is developing further and further. It brings you into a domain where you can focus more on your business by taking advantage of the pay-as-you-go capability.
Right.
I think that's very important for startups.
Absolutely, and also sometimes from a requirement perspective or regulation perspective, if the data cannot leave the country, we have to put a data center in the country in place. So sometimes that's the local edge that we then put into perspective to build our business and scale. So it's a combination between the local edge device, so you can take the edge device, send through with 5G, for example, only the anomalies, so not the whole footage, but only the anomalies. Then it has to remain in the country. You leverage the data center, use the computation there. But technically, you can also use the cloud or public, private, hybrid. from any angle.
Yep. Any insights on that, Bas?
Yeah, I'm just. I think the insight is mainly that technically there's more and more possible. Sometimes that is when I'm looking at also what organizations are coping with. It's not always the technical possibilities. It's often technically everything we want is possible, but it's still hard to get it organized. And I think that is one of the. You mentioned also regulations, and I tried to pinpoint it a bit in the hourglass model. There are still some challenges ahead for how we can manage this, not only as an organization but as a society, to make all these things work together. And I think that there is still a lot of work to do on that aspects and a lot of thinking. But totally agree that technology, what is already possible today is, if you just hear it, is a bit beyond our imagination already. That goes very, very fast. But
get into the paradox of choice, probably. You have too many possibilities. But I think what's interesting is, first we spoke about 5 years. Put everything in the cloud. We basically centralize. But because we have done that, we now create basically time and maybe even budgets or resources, because that's so well organized. Now we can look at the spearheads, right? Because all the examples we now look into are the spearheads. I mean, we don't talk about ERP, we don't have workspaces, all the basic stuff. I mean, don't make it too easy, but that's done, right? That's done. We do. But now it's like, okay, how can we optimize? And those optimizations are all in the spearheads.
And you're looking for new processes that weren't in the sphere of automation before. Because when you speak connected lights, I mean, your company is global. You need to get that sensor data from everywhere. And I remember 10 years ago, people would ask us, can we have one instance in each region, 3 time zones, 3 regions that will deal with it like that. Right now, we have clients who say, we're going to grow from 10 points of presence to 25, from 25 to 75, from 75 to... We have clients with 150 points of presence around the globe who are looking to do this kind of ingest of data. That's a totally different definition of the edge. Once you get to the point that you've taken care of your core.
Yeah.
Right. So let us look how that looks like from a Moody perspective. I think a great sample with many different angles that we could elaborate another 10, I think, broadcasts on it.
Great.
But I bring me the first question back, Bas. So what shift is needed to get everyone on the same agenda? If you look to that digital ecosystem, digital edge, going forward like this, right?
Yeah.
What do you see from a cultural, organizational point of view?
Yeah, I think that there's something. I think you see some trends in the market. I think this ESG is what also in the movie is something that is connecting in ambitions for organization as a way to collaborate, because you actually now can have shared goals. Before it was more about creating our own money, so to say, or profitability. I think that is one area which can bring people on the same page. I think another area is the thing that we touched upon already in the ecosystems. We find out now through the demands of the customer or society that we really are very dependent on each other to make it work. And it can also be a competitive edge, actually, to have an effective ecosystem and to work on that. And maybe it is even more valuable in the end to drive the impact you want to make as an organization than just having great technology in your house. So that could be some aspects that is bringing us forward into this journey and find each other.
Yeah, but if you look to these kind of let's say change within your business models and operating models, Kevin. So what kind of models do you prefer? So do you look to platforms? Do you look to ecosystems? Do you build it yourself? Doing it yourself? So what is the successful combination you are looking at?
It highly depends on the case, obviously, but that's the easy answer.
You don't go one away with it.
No. I was already afraid of that. No, but
it depends.
No, it depends, but that's the consultancy answer. Yeah. No, but in the end, never build something which is there. I think that's if you look into Signify strategy, that's what we did. The transition to the cloud, just bring it there or use it where it is if it's there. Ecosystems, we need ecosystems, right? Because talking about road safety or home security, that's not only lighting, right? That's not only our sensors. You need a whole set of data to, in the end, promise that. And of course, there's also proprietary software sometimes, because I think Signify Philips is born from innovation still. We issue the most patents in Europe. So we have a lot of crown jewels, and those crown jewels now usually are generated through digital developments as well. But that's only where you make a difference. It's rather stupid to just create something which is already out there. Then you just use it. That's pretty simple.
But what we see in the market are really two schools of thoughts which are almost diametrically opposed. So we see one group of companies who are clearly banking on the ecosystem through partnering and kind of disassembly of the digital services. And then there's a group of companies who are trying to strategically do it all themselves. In the end, they're still building those same composable services, but they're trying to vertically integrate and do it all. And it's not clear at this moment which one of those two battles is going to win. I'd be interested in your perspective on that, but it's the Teslas and the Apple on one side, and it's a lot of startups on the other side that are kind of battling it out. And there's clearly a lot of value already developed through those vertically integrated model very recently. But when you compare it to the total market, I happen to be a believer of the ecosystem way. So I think in the long run, it will still prevail as the market expands. I think it's more of a first mover advantage that can get you the benefit when you're vertically integrated.
And if you look then to let's say the next generation of tech needed to do this, so what are you looking at?
I believe that the open source thinking there is going to win, because it's going to increase the speed of innovation, and that is something that in a captive market you can never replicate. So that's the reason I underpin the ecosystem thought as a leading thought in a longer time span.
I think I agree on that, because if you look at the data, Rob, I mean, if you build up the own data for your intelligence, it takes, like Kevin said, it takes years, right? Lighting years, right, to get there. But in order to say, okay, if we share that in an economy and I give you a piece of my data, to build up your intelligence, and you give me a piece of your data, and you can exchange that. I think if ecosystems are integrated or exchanging data, we can all grow, and the economy can grow. And that's my firm belief. And then to Johan's point, if it's open, and it's open source, open standards, it's easier to grow, because if it's proprietary, that might be good, but then you get all kind of silos and you need to integrate the silos. Right. And the vision that we have from a technology point of view, leave the data where it is, but give us the subset of data that can help me build it intelligent. So coming back on that neighborhood or city example, if you look at the life cycle of a neighborhood, that's typically 40 years. But the road in that neighborhood has a life cycle of 25 years. The sewer has a life cycle of 20 years. The kindergartens or the vegetation, they have another life cycle. Yep. So how can we now look at the holistical point of view that if you build a new neighborhood or the neighborhood is at its end or the sewer is collapsing, maybe I should replace everything around it, because the cost is within the road replacement or the sewer replacement. So they might be leading. So then you can look at situation awareness and can create like, hey, I see now that in the city, when a sewer breaks down, it has more impact on life than when it is somewhere in the fields.
Yep, got your point, right. And if you take that, Bas, in the perspective of open source, open data, are we adapting well enough? Or is it still, okay, let's go first for data quality and data management and...
I think, yeah, open source, there's two different things. I think the ecosystem for open source, I think in generally, maybe there's two schools of thought. I think the big trend is for people to work with modules that are there or solutions that are there and build maybe their own solution, but it consists of all kind of modules, of all kind of other things that are, they're just using it to be able to accelerate. That's one. And I think for open data, of course, the government is bringing in some open data, but there's a lot of improvement to be made. And if we're looking at, but there's data sharing, as we discussed about it in the data ecosystem, I think that is also just coming up. We just see the first real examples. I think you had some examples also in the pre-talk of where this is happening, but this is still early phases But I think it will be a very big thing that we are starting to share data in an ecosystem in a more systematic, but also in a more standardized way. So I am, let's say, a company. I am part of multiple ecosystems. But because we have this hourglass model, and at one point we get some kind of standardization of what it actually means to share data, I can share my data in the ecosystem with you. And actually, because I'm using the standards, I can also share at one point this data, or some part of it, with the same standards to you. And we can more easily collaborate in ecosystems. But at the moment, in practice, for every ecosystem has its own agreements, and actually in practice today it is more that I am having a one-off ad hoc collaboration with another organization, and for that specific collaboration I make ad hoc agreements. So we are still quite far.
That obviously doesn't scale, and
that doesn't scale, but that's what's happening today. Yeah, that's the reality of today.
What I find interesting is how does it come that these innovations happen in such bursts, right? So 10 years ago or 15 years ago, we didn't have iPhones and we didn't have any of the apps that are on it, and they're now unthinkable, taken away from our lives. And I believe that it's certain underlying technologies that kind of get you to that point, right? It was the combination of somebody developing that phone on glass combined with availability of 3 and 4G networks. Right, that got you the data bandwidth, the speed that could actually take advantage of the application. Well, there's a next generation of that kind of tech coming, right? There is 5G at scale for the enterprise, and those telecom operators are thinking about 6G, and that's going to. Is it perhaps too crazy to think that 5G can be to the enterprise what the iPhone was to us as consumers? So is that perhaps going to trigger that next generation of disruptive innovations where somebody certainly has a better reason to adopt a new standard or to do something at scale? I believe that those bursts come with new tech arriving in that sense.
But do we see limits today, or don't we see those new tech yet today?
Now, there's definitely limits at the moment. If you were to look at deployments of 5G in the enterprise, that's you can do that in Signify's factory, but then right now, do you then backhaul all of that data all the way back to the headquarters of Signify in the Netherlands or the regional office where they're developing? How do you organize that entire chain of custody around that data? Or do you need in between more tech to help support that?
Yep.
I think these are the foundational components. Once you can stitch them together, then you can start taking advantage of that.
But stitch them together also implies that everybody within the ecosystem should be at the same level, should be understanding the same principles, should be willing to share. Otherwise, you cannot multiply.
Yeah,
right?
that's where Bas, I think, makes a good point about those standards. But you should also realize that over time, because certain standards exist, in other areas you can actually have heterogeneity.
Yep.
Let me give a simple example. A long time ago, we all had Windows machine. Right now, you can have Windows and Macs and other devices from Google all operate and interoperate. That wasn't possible before. In the past, it had to be on one standard. Right now, it can all interoperate, and you see that in more areas.
Right.
And I think that's very helpful, because then within something you can leave the focus and let it go, because in other areas you do, as Bas is saying, making a good set of agreements.
Do you see changes here, Kevin, in terms of both from B2B versus B2C perspective? So you're doing a lot of ecosystems within both B2B but also B2C, and within B2C you also have those channels now, right? With different maturity levels or willingness too, right? But from that perspective, B2B, B2C, is there a big difference?
No, not from a fundamental level, because in the end, of course, the adoption can be faster or slower. And that's usually because, you know, in just installing a few new lights in your home, you can decide it today and you have it tomorrow and then it's done. And if you do that in an enterprise, then you probably need a project plan and a lot of stakeholder management and all the things we don't like to do. So that takes just longer. But from a fundamental level, no, because in the end, where Philips Hue is working with Google Home, our lighting system is working with Honeywell or with another partner, right? So it's just different, but the fundamentals are the same.
I would expect that you would say that from a consumerization of IT, B2C is further down the road than from a B2B perspective.
No, of course, the adoption is faster just because what I just said, you can instantly adopt it. But the impact businesses make with the same technology is bigger. They can make a bigger change. And it's also more complex, but then once they change, think about it, right? If you use a smart lighting system combined with all the other smart tools, you can maybe get rid of 30% of your office space because you're just using it smarter. Yeah, try that with your toilet in home. That's not possible, right? Yeah. You can't just say, oh, let's cut off half of the house. So in the end of the day, for me, it's not about, you know, of course, consumers are faster. But in the end, businesses can make a bigger impact in the end. That's what I genuinely believe.
What can we learn from both sides, Bas, here?
I think the main thing is that there's a lot of similarities between B2C and B2B, and I think I totally agree. B2C, you see a little bit the quick adaptation, so we think it's more innovative. But in the end, if you look at businesses and how they are also becoming digitized and changing, that is fundamentally changing very fast also. But it's a bit more, sometimes also hidden from the public. So we see it less. It is less obvious. But of course, that there is what's happening in the one field is also happening on the other field. Fundamentally, I think it's a very valid point.
Yeah. Something to add to that, Johan? You see differences within your ecosystems there?
I like your term of democratization of IT for sure, which is blending the two. I certainly believe that. And I see a lot of spillovers, so that the principles of what they tend to learn in what you currently can see in large consumer scale platforms, because they're more visible, these large digitally transparent platforms. I think in the B2B side, you will start seeing them as well. And the example I was imagining this morning as I was driving here was around, drawings in support of maybe augmented reality in the factory, right? Where the maintenance person gets an Oculus and then he sees the drawing over the machine that he needs to repair. I'm imagining that enterprise can do that by themselves, but why wouldn't it be a field where somebody tries to do that globally at scale and becomes the Uber of providing those drawings on a custom basis? I mean, that's possible in the B2B space. That doesn't exist yet.
Nope.
And I can imagine many examples of that, but those are all flavors of what has already occurred in our own B2C world. So I definitely see one ahead of the other. I see scale taking advantage of global tech already in the B2C side more. And therefore, like you say, more impact.
But yeah, but that example, just think about it. If you want to implement that, technically it's possible, but then safety, compliancy, security, blah, blah, all this, we need to check that. Yeah, we need to check that before we can roll that out. Yeah, if you do that at home, you basically just put on a glass and, okay, let's fix it myself. Yeah, the most horrible thing can happen is that you put yourself on the current, right? That's, and then, okay, that's it.
It's still quite dangerous.
Something like that.
Yeah, but okay.
Something like that.
You won't end up in hospital.
No,
you know, that's the.
I think you see it in the industry as well. It's kind of like an evolution. We saw it in the banking industry first with payments. Nobody wanted to exchange payments data with each other until the regulation kicked in, and then banks were forced kind of to exchange it. And not every data, but certain elements of data. So you saw that evolution already happening. It's now happening in the anti-money laundering side. We have seen it in health with patients' records. First, we didn't want to do it, and then regulation said some things, if we regulate it, some data we can share because it benefits the economy. And now you will see that in different sides of the industry emerging as well, that are more digitally.
It's always good to see a couple of samples, and especially if you go to that topic of digital edge, where we already discussed, or at least tried to bring on the table, competences, right? Capabilities, huge problem in a certain way. So let's look how Brain Creators does that. Well, Glenn, please enlighten us. So I see mainly two things. You were talking about the dynamic digital twin at the one end, and at the other end you say, let's duplicate or triple or whatever number of times brains and automate this, right? So there are two different principles, right?
Yeah, so a digital inspector is basically an automation of a skill of a human. So we call it, we don't clone humans, but we clone the skills. And we believe that behind every human inspector or human expert, there's a digital clone. So what this digital clone does is that the domain expert, they teach the skill, like how do you need to analyze roads on defects, for example. And they look at videos, and on every 5 meters, they look at the surface and they say, there's a crack, there's a pothole, there's raveling. And it takes them 6 weeks to do that by video, if they would do it, and it takes them another 3 months to intelligently automate that against the local regulation. In the Netherlands, that's a CROW. Internationally, that is PCI. But you need to kind of do that. These experts are scarce. Right? They are not there because the new generation, they go more digitally. The work of the future, they look for other professions. So these domain expertise is kind of, you know, dying, kind of like it's not there. So what if we could transfer that knowledge to a system so you can do it faster, more reliable, because the computer doesn't make mistakes. You can do it more safer, and you can do it at speed.
Right.
So if you could do that, you can lower your cost and you can accelerate the business, because then 90% of the workload of repetitive components will be automated, and then the human inspector, he can work with the insights, where we're talking about making connections with other ecosystems,
Right.
determining the impact.
Right.
And that's basically what we do across every industry. There are multiple use cases where you can apply that.
Now let's go first. I want to check with Bas. So we got humans, and then we said, well, let's give humans some tools, right? Give them a Google Glass or whatever. And now we're going to say, well, let's pick the brain and robotize it and automate it in the end, right?
It's a skill, yeah, a repetitive skill.
Repetitive
that the human
skill.
does.
But in the middle, we have seen from a safety perspective, hazardous, all kind of stuff, regulations, that humans and digital tools within, for example, the safety and inspection is adapted very low. Right? So if you talk to safety directors of plants, they are talking about the warnings, the lights, the shoes, right? Clothing, etc., but not about these kind of stuff. Are we adapting this? Should we adapt this kind of thinking, faster?
Yeah, I think it's always been happening, of course, automation and also in the factory. But what we consider now as some revolution, 100 years ago when you had machines coming into the factories, that was also a revolution at that time. And now it's happening in another scale. We are digitizing more complex skills than before. It was just a saw or a machine bring two pieces together. That was handmade before also. So in that sense, I think it is very similar, and concerns about safety, etc. Also, I think the only thing what makes it maybe different now, and that is still maybe a little bit new territory, is when you are talking about digital twins, or which is actually just a combination of algorithms that influence each other, that can we still oversee what at one point is happening, because the systems that we're building might become so complex that it becomes maybe at one point we cannot oversee it. And of course there's a lot of opportunities to
Right.
put in safeguards, put in humans in the loops and everything. So, but I think that basically what the brain creator is doing, it's always been happening, only now it's on a new level, so we call it AI, and
Right.
it's something very special.
Maybe what is important to add, Rob, is that we are not replacing the humans. What we are doing is we're augmenting them with insights that is repetitive work. So the domain expert still teaches the digital inspector and it supervises it. So, for example, with road inspection, we do it now 90 times faster to analyze it, so in a matter of hours instead of 3 months. But then the road inspector is validating it. He will stamp it, and he will give
but
it
it's
back.
maybe you can also say, if you look back in the old time, at one point in the beginning was still a man, a mechanic operating the machine. So hey, we're not replacing, he's now operating the machine and making the stamps. And at one point we thought, oh, that's also not necessary because the machine can be automated. So maybe at one point the supervisor that we have can be automated also at one point. So I don't think it's also a
But
problem.
I don't want to go into the discussion of replacing, because that's because I don't want to go in the pain discussion. I want to go in the gain discussion. I think from a Signify point of view, right, in your production process, these thoughts are handy.
No, yeah,
These thoughts are you following also?
these are necessary. You know, if just taking the example of 3D printing, what we do is basically we bring back production to Western European countries, to the US, where previously the last 20-25 years, the only thing we did was just to push it out for cost reasons. Yeah. But still, consumers are not willing to pay a lot more. They are maybe willing to pay a little bit more for a sustainable product, but we know from extended research, not too much. And although we can have a lot of against that, but that's just the way it is. So then you have to be smarter. That's the only answer to that challenge. And to be smarter, you have to automate it, and second, you have to rule out a lot of waste and mistakes. So we use cameras in our printers who can detect if a printer is doing a good job or a bad job, and then stops it. So we waste time, but also we avoid wasting material. I think the biggest difference between, let's say, or call it industrial revolution in the past, is you would install a device, and that the device was the way it was, right? Yeah. But now you install a device, and it gets smarter every day, because it literally learns. Sometimes that machine is even smarter than the inspector, because it can make correlations between two events which nobody ever thought was a correlation. Yep. Does it mean that the human is stupid? No. Probably the correlation needs a solution, and that's what the machine can't think of himself or herself.
Need to be programmed, need to be controlled.
Or you need to change the design or the process or whatever. So.
The interesting concept here, Johan, is it from your perspective, like Equinix and your partners, right? So, if I hear Kevin well, then he says, well, in the end, the machine or the process will be getting smarter and smarter, right? Mm-hmm. And it will have an impact on how do you service, how do you support, how do you, if you understand what I mean.
Yes.
So suddenly your time scales are now not in, let's say, boxes or okay, Kevin, for the next 3 years you're okay. Well, nothing happened or here, but suddenly you come into a conclusion that within 3 weeks or 3 months you talk with him. He said, okay, gosh, you're further down the road than I thought. We need to. How do you cope with that as Equinix?
What we see is that capacity needs to be available on demand, and where you previously said, I need a contract for this much capacity globally because I know where I have my factories, I know what I want to do, and it will look like this. On the infrastructure side, we see this definitive drive that people want to consume capacity on the fly and be able to scale elasticity up and down. And that is the kind of capability, because when your machine in a certain market starts to attract more demand or things change, you want much more flexibility in your consumption patterns. And that is something that we see. And the other dimension that we see is that service companies are starting to develop kind of the principal thought of, am I trying to service a manufacturing company like Signify as a managed service, or am I trying to be more of an asset provider? And the split between those two, we also see that one party is starting to grow closer to servicing end organizations, and other organizations look more for optimizing how certain assets can be leveraged. Right. And that split allows for closer to the customer work as well.
Right. So if you take that into perspective that there's huge potential in terms of digital ecosystems, going to the digital edge, all those new technologies, changing operating models even, right? A little part here is leadership. So I would try to get some wrap up here in terms of what do we need to do as leaders at this table? So what is your wisdom here, Glenn?
I would say entrepreneurship. And entrepreneurship in, like you said, collaborating, sharing data is multiplying. Being open for those mindsets, like how can we collaborate with partners and get the best benefits out of it. It doesn't mean that you have to give away all your IP, but maybe some piece that can be regulated across the ecosystem that we all benefit from. And lastly, I think being adaptive to change and reinvent yourself constantly. Right.
I like the share and the multiply component in the entrepreneurship very well, because that helps them. Johan, what would be your wisdom here?
My wisdom would be focused on diversity of thought, because I believe that these are such complex environments that unless you can unlock the potential of broad sets of people who come from diverse backgrounds and experiences, you're never going to go wild enough and fast enough in order to monetize on the opportunity. Right. So to me, it's diversity of thought, for sure.
Great. In America, they call you the Chief Growth Officer, Mr. Kevin. So what would be your wisdom as Chief Growth Officer here?
I would say choose for value. And what I mean is, and Bas gave the perfect example, are so many possibilities that you can get overwhelmed. And I think for business leaders, it's important to point out where are we going to make a difference. What's the real impact? Because otherwise you get swamped in possibilities, you try everything. Believe me, with 3D printing, everything is possible. So it's the biggest paradox of choice you can imagine. Because there's simply no, it doesn't exist. The answer is always yes, but then still you have to choose. You have to choose, and I think that's on which markets you want to serve, but also indeed technology, which decisions do we make first, and then, but then in the end it's always either a business impact or, in our case, a sustainability impact, which is almost equal. That's where you have to make your decisions.
Right.
And that's what you have to do from a leadership standpoint, together with your teams. But at some point, you have to make a decision where to go for.
And then you stay Chief Growth Officer if you do that well. Bas, if we look to this discussion, so to summarize, what are the key takeaways in your mind?
Yeah, a lot has been said. So I think it was a very interesting discussion. I think endless possibilities on the technology area, and so many that we have to do a lot of thinking on other aspects to start to make it work. I think that's one of the key things. I liked the different elements that came about in the discussion about purpose, ESG, especially Kevin and Signify. You have it in there because I think that can be a real driver for change and also for collaborating. And then, yeah, in the end, it is about, yeah, maybe also decisiveness and making a deliberate choice what we are going to do here. I think that are maybe the elements that stick with me.
Right. Well, thank you. So this, I think, is a wrap, so to speak. So I would like to thank the guests at the table. It was my pleasure to have this conversation. What does it mean for the rest? Nothing else than stay safe, stay healthy.
Every connection, every link, every purchase, every update, download, trade, refresh. Every yes, I'm still watching, and turn left here. Equinix is everywhere. As the world's digital infrastructure company, we connect places, partners, and possibilities. They all come together on Platform Equinix. Harnessed by the world's digital leaders, our global interconnected ecosystem is ready to power your success. With a physical and virtual infrastructure that adapts as your business transforms, you can unlock new opportunities and stay secure and connected across the most dynamic industries. You lead the way, we cut the lag. No buffer between start here and go anywhere. And with every leap forward, we look ahead to do better, in service to our communities, to our team, and to our customers. Together, we enable the innovations that enrich our work, life, and planet. Equinix.